Welcome to DLS's Instructor Training Series, Developing Listening Skills, Part 1, Stages of a Listening Activity. By the end of this session, you will be able to identify the stages of a listening activity, give examples of activities that you can do at each stage, and evaluate listening activities from textbooks, suggesting adaptations where needed. What are the stages for a listening activity? A listening activity has three main stages: pre-listening, listening, and post-listening. Notice that pre-listening and post-listening both involve speaking in the target language, of course, and that listening happens in the middle. What's the purpose of each of these stages? The purpose of the pre-listening stage is to introduce the topic, activate background knowledge and vocabulary, and get students interested. In the listening stage, we want to, of course, help students understand the audio and help them develop listening strategies. And then in the post-listening stage, we want to help students consolidate and react to what they've heard, perhaps extending to additional topics. You may be wondering, why have listening stages? Why not just listen? Well, in the classroom, we as teachers, when we talk to students, we tend to give language to the students one drop at a time. So we slow down, we speak carefully, we use simple language, and students understand what we say. But outside the classroom, it's a different story. When students are speaking the target language or hearing the target language in the real world, they probably feel like the language is a crashing wave, and there's no way for them to catch every drop. What we want is something in the middle. So listening stages provide support for students. They help prepare them to listen, and they help them to interpret and understand what they're hearing. Listening stages also help students develop listening strategies so that they learn how to deal with audio even when they can't understand everything. And before we look at examples, here are just a few general points to keep in mind. When we talk about selecting audio for students, a level appropriate audio is something that is a little bit beyond students' current level. So if they understand every word, it's probably too easy. And when we listen in our own language, we don't understand every word. The students definitely, when they go out into the world and listen, they won't understand everything. So we want to help them develop strategies for extracting meaning even when they don't understand everything. And our goal is that the students should feel challenged, but we don't want them to feel frustrated. So we definitely want to provide support so that they feel that they have achieved and been successful in their listening. Let's start by looking at activities for pre-listening. So these activities work well with almost any type of listening. One is to have the student look at and describe pictures. So for example, let's say you're going to listen to a dialogue of someone buying food in the marketplace. You could show the student this picture and have them describe what they see. And this is a really easy activity to do for almost any type of listening. If you look at the audio ahead of time, find a photo on Google Images that is related to the audio, and then have the student look at the picture and describe it, that will work great as a pre-listening activity. And it's also really nice because pictures provide some visual support for students, and that can be so helpful with listening. Another great pre-listening activity is to have students predict what will be in the audio. So if you show them the title of the audio or show them a picture related to the audio, then they can make some predictions about what they will hear in the audio. And then finally, another great pre-listening activity is to elicit background knowledge. So if you're going to, for example, listen to an audio about a recent election in the target region, you might have the student tell you what they know about that topic. For listening activities, after you've done pre-listening, we're going to look at two types of listening activities. One is listening for gist. So this should be an easy listening activity where the student just tries to understand some basic information about the audio. So maybe where or how many people or what type of conversation it is. After that, then the student can listen again, this time listening for more details, so listening for detailed comprehension. So, what are some activities that you can do to listen for gist? One activity is that you can give the student a list of topics, have them listen, and then have them check the topics that are mentioned in the audio. Another gist listening activity is to give the student 2 or 3 pictures and have them choose the picture that best matches the listening. This is great for low-level learners. Another good gist listening activity is to have the student make some predictions in the pre-listening stage, have them write down 2 or 3 or 4 of those predictions, and then they can listen to the audio and check to see whether the predictions are true. And then finally, a great gist activity is to have the student answer big picture comprehension questions. So that can be questions like, where is this audio taking place? Who's talking to who? What's their relationship? Etc. Of course, it will depend on the audio. For detailed listening activities, you can have the student answer detailed comprehension questions. So these are questions that you, as the teacher, would write ahead of time and give to the student, and they would focus on the details of the audio. You might take the transcript of the audio and have the students fill in the blank. That's very detailed listening. Or you might have the student complete a chart or a graphic organizer. And then for post-listening, which as we know should be a speaking activity in the target language, you can have the student discuss what they heard in the listening. So maybe they can compare something in the listening to something else, maybe something from their own culture. They can react to or give opinions about what they heard. And they could summarize what they learned or list questions they still have. Now that we've looked at examples of pre-listening, listening, and post-listening activities, let's look at a few textbooks and evaluate the listening activities we find there. So this is an example from a Spanish textbook. It's from Adelante, Book 1. And here you can see that there's a picture and you can see this activity here. So the first question is, what stage of a listening activity is this? So we can say that this is a pre-listening activity, and we see that The pre-listening is asking the student to make some predictions about the conversation based on the photo. So this is a great pre-listening activity, and it's especially nice that the textbook has included a photo because the visual support is really helpful for students. So let's look at the next activity in the textbook where the students need to listen to the conversation. So it looks like the conversation between these two women is they're talking about a recent shopping trip. And so the activity is for the students need to listen and they need to write a list of the clothing items that each woman mentions, and then they need to put a check if the person actually bought it. So what stage of a listening activity is this? Of course, this is a listening activity. But if we think about whether it's gist or details, this activity actually looks like a little bit more of a detailed comprehension activity because students have to listen quite carefully and closely in order to catch all of this information. So if we wanted to add a gist listening activity, we might create a simpler activity like this. So we might say, who bought more clothing? And then that's just a very easy, straightforward gist activity that the students can listen to and answer. Let's look at the next activity in the course book. So this activity is in Spanish here. Let's put it in English. So what stage of a listening activity do you think this is? So this would be a post-listening activity. So here the students get to reflect on the audio and answer questions based on what they learned about the audio. And here they have a nice chance to personalize some of the content in the audio. Next, let's look at an example from a Russian textbook. So this is from Golosa, Book 1. And here, the students need to listen to 3 short conversations. So we can see some translations here. So we can see from the translations that it looks like these are 3 conversations when someone is coming from the airport, going through customs, and then arriving somewhere. So looking at these questions here, based on these, what stage of a listening activity would you say this is? So this definitely looks like a listening activity, and it really looks like a detailed listening activity. So right away, we can see that this textbook is missing a gist listening activity, and it also doesn't have any pre-listening. So here's the complete page from the course book. Here we can see the 3 conversations we just looked at with the comprehension questions for each one. And then after that in the course book, we can see that the course book has pictures and then it has a transcript for each one. But we can see here that there's no activity for the students to do. So just looking at this, we can see a few areas where we might want to adapt. So first, there's no pre-listening, so we definitely want to add that. The first activity goes straight to detailed comprehension. There's no gist. And then here, where we have the transcript, there's nothing for the student to do, no activity for them. So let's look at how we could adapt this. So one really good thing about the textbook is that it does provide pictures. So for a pre-listening activity, we could take the pictures and show them to students and have students just describe the pictures. So what do you see in each picture? Who's there? Where are they? And this is a great pre-listening activity. We could also give the students some specific questions. So again, describing the photos, saying a couple of things in Russian. And and then having the student make a simple prediction based on each photo. So this would be a great pre-listening activity using the pictures from the course book and then just adding a few questions for the student. And then for a gist listening activity, we can use the same 3 photos here and just have the students do a simple matching exercise. So the student can listen and match each conversation with the correct photo. So this is a great gist activity. It will be easy enough for the students to do, hopefully, after one listening. For listening for details, we really don't need to have any adaptions here because the book already has some great detailed comprehension questions. So if we do a pre-listening and a gist listening before that, then the student should be really well prepared for these detailed comprehension questions. And then for a post-listening activity, we could bring in the transcripts. We could have the students perhaps circle any new vocabulary, maybe underline any parts that were difficult to understand. And then maybe we could have the students say whether or not they like traveling, whether they like to travel by plane, etc. Great work. That's the end of Developing Listening Skills Part 1. And you can now identify the 3 stages of a listening activity: pre-listening, listening, and post-listening. You can give one example of an activity you can do at each stage, and you can evaluate and adapt textbook listening activities. In Part 2 of Developing Listening Skills, we will look at creating activities for authentic video and audio. We'll also look at how to differentiate, so how to provide extra support for lower level learners and how to appropriately challenge higher level learners. So be sure to check out Part 2, which is available in the LMS. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, be sure to reach out to your LTS.